Real Reddit stories. If you love wild things and crazy drama, hit that subscribe button and drop a like to help more people find the madness.
My dad secretly broke into my room and destroyed my books to stop me from getting educated, so I publicly exposed him and ruined his life. Now he's back, homeless and desperate. My dad is the most competitive person I've ever met, but not in the way you're thinking, because it was only directed towards me. I remember being 10 and playing Uno together for the first time. He told me he would go easy on me, so I did my best to impress him. But when I was at just one card and he had 3, the entire vibe of the room shifted. I could literally see beads of sweat dripping down his forehead, and unfortunately, I won. I expected him to congratulate me, or at least just tell me he had fun, but no. Instead, he picked up the deck of cards and threw them against the wall. "Go clean them up," he barked, before slamming his bedroom at full force. He didn't speak to me for the rest of the week, and even missed my school talent show. From there, I swore to myself that I'd never play another game. But a year later, he and his friends were in the living room playing Connect 4. From my eavesdropping, I could hear him losing, so when I walked in, I expected his face to be red with anger. Instead, he was smiling super wide. I thought all the competitive BS was in the past, so when he asked me to join in, I agreed. Everything was all fun and games until we got to the last chips. The grid was almost filled out. I could see his teeth grinding against each other. Now, they're probably wondering why I didn't just let him win. And halfway through the game, when I realized he was terrible, I tried to, but he immediately noticed and asked me to follow him upstairs. There, he didn't say anything, just clenched his fists really hard and glared at me. "I know what you're doing. Don't even effing think about it." I gulped, and we went back downstairs to continue playing. Adrenaline pumped through my veins when I won. He told his friends to get out. "Who the F do you think you are?" He screamed so loudly that I thought the windows were about to crack. And if you've ever been part of an abusive family before, then you understand exactly what I'm about to describe. The entire house was tense. It was the kind of silence that only comes before violence. My dad raised his hand to strike my skull, but I guess the pleading look of desperation in my eyes was enough to stop him, because he managed to stop himself and gulp down a bottle of beer from the fridge. I tried to convince myself that it was over, that he had finally snapped out of it, until I came home with a report card of all A's. I ran home as fast as I could to tell my dad. I pictured him giving me this huge hug and telling me how much he loved me, until reality slapped me in the face. "Did you cheat?" was the first thing he asked. "No, Dad, Did you sleep with your teacher?" By this point, I was so shocked that I couldn't even breathe, let alone respond. When I went to bed that night, I never woke up. For school, that is. You see, usually my dad wakes me up at 7:30 a.m., but this time he didn't, and turns out he didn't go to work either, because when I went downstairs, he was sitting on the couch making phone calls. "Dad, why didn't you wake me up in time for school?" I said, voice shaking. "Son, you're not going to school anymore. I'm homeschooling you." Well, 11-year-old me assumed that it was because my dad wanted to spend more quality time with me. "Yeah, thank you, Daddy," I screamed, before hugging him as tight as I could. Boy, was I wrong, because my dad's school only had one rule. I wasn't allowed to learn anything. He spent the first 2 weeks entertaining me with Disney movies and barbecues. By the time we were on our 20th rewatch of The Lion King, I actually got sick of it. "Dad, when do we get to, do real school stuff?" My tone was sheepish, filled with fear. "Why? So you can get smarter than me and start thinking you're better. Be effing grateful for once." I think deep down, I always knew what he was doing was wrong, but I pushed it away because I never wanted to make my dad upset. So by the time I was 16, I had the reading level of a 5th grader, and my only skill was surviving a narcissistic emotional abuser. I did try to secretly learn when I thought my dad was looking, and for a while it worked. But one night when he came home from work, he bashed me over the head 13 times. Turns out he had put a camera in my room, and each hit represented a page I had read in secret. Naturally, I moved out the day I turned 18. I didn't really know how the outside world worked, so I got rejected by dozens of strangers until the local church agreed to let me in. The pastor was generous, the type of man to give you a feast when you ask for a slice of bread. Unfortunately, he gave me so much love and reassurance that it made me realize just how psychotic my dad really was. So I decided to expose my dad online and let the internet deal with him. I included everything: the educational abuse, the violence, the dramatics, and of course, his psychotic competitiveness. By the time I hit post, tears were streaming down my face, and when I turned on my phone an hour later, I finally learned why people always say, "Be careful what you post online." My story had gone viral, but not in the way I'd hoped. While many people were supportive, others were calling me a liar, saying no parent would sabotage their child's education out of competitiveness. And then the messages started coming in, dozens of them from different accounts, all with the same threatening undertones. "You think you're so smart now? Who do you think you are? You'll regret this." The writing style was unmistakable. Somehow, my dad had found my post. I immediately deleted the post, but it was too late. Screenshots were already circulating. I showed Pastor Mike the messages, and he looked genuinely concerned. He suggested I stay away from the computer for a while and focus on my GED prep instead. But I couldn't shake this feeling that my dad was watching me somehow. The next morning, I woke up to 3 new emails from accounts I didn't recognize. All of them had the same basic message: "I know where you are." I blocked them all and tried to convince myself it was just internet trolls. But then Mrs. Kelsey, our old neighbor, messaged me on Facebook. "I saw your dad asking around about churches in the area yesterday. He mentioned your name to several people. Just thought you should know." My stomach dropped. I realized he must have been tracking my online activity and pieced together which church I was staying at from context clues in my posts. Pastor Mike took it seriously when I showed him the message. He installed new locks on all the doors that same day and gave me the only spare key to my room. "You're safe here," he told me, "but maybe we should talk to the police." I shook my head. The police had never helped before when neighbors called about the yelling. They always believed my dad's excuses. Besides, what crime could I report? Being creepy isn't illegal. A week went by with no incidents. I started to relax a little. Pastor Mike had connected me with a tutor named Marilyn, who was helping me catch up on basic education 3 times a week. She was patient and never made me feel stupid when I struggled with things most teenagers already knew. For the first time, I was actually enjoying learning. Then the emails started again. This time they were different. They came from accounts with names like Uncle Robert and Cousin Terry, people claiming to be distant relatives I'd never met. They all said similar things about how they'd heard about my situation and wanted to help me reconcile with my dad. One of them almost convinced me. The email was from someone claiming to be my mom's brother, an uncle I'd never known about. He wrote about how my dad was a changed man who regretted everything and just wanted to make amends. He suggested meeting at a coffee shop to talk things over. I was actually considering it until I noticed something in the last paragraph. "Stop being such an ungrateful little shat for once." That phrase, my dad had used it countless times. This wasn't some long-lost uncle. It was my dad pretending to be family to lure me out. I showed Pastor Mike, and he immediately called the church board to discuss security measures. They agreed to install cameras around the building and gave me a small alarm I could press if I ever felt unsafe. I started to feel a little better knowing people were looking out for me. I threw myself into studying. Marilyn said I was making making incredible progress, especially with reading. I'd gone up almost 2 grade levels in just a few weeks. Pastor Mike helped me apply for a GED program that would start in the fall. For the first time, I was thinking about the future instead of just surviving the present. Then one morning, I went to get my study materials from my locker in the church basement, and everything was destroyed. All my notebooks were ripped apart. My textbooks had pages torn out. Even my pencils were snapped in half. Someone had broken into my locker overnight. Pastor Mike checked the security cameras, but they showed nothing. Somehow, the system had malfunctioned during the exact hours when the vandalism must have happened. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. It has to be him, I said, pacing around Pastor Mike's office. He's trying to stop me from learning again. Pastor Mike nodded grimly. I think you're right, but how did he get in? We changed all the locks. That question haunted me for days. I started checking under my bed before sleeping and pushing a chair against my door. I kept all my new study materials with me at all times in a backpack I never let out of my sight. A week later, I was putting on my jacket to go to a tutoring session when I felt something in the pocket. It was an envelope I hadn't put there. Inside was a photograph of me sleeping in my bed. It had been taken recently. I recognized the t-shirt I'd worn just 2 nights before. On the back was a handwritten note. Still think you're smarter than me? My hands were shaking so badly I dropped the photo. Someone, my dad, had been in my room while I was sleeping. He'd stood over my bed and taken a picture. The thought made me physically sick. Pastor Mike was horrified when I showed him. He offered to let me stay at his house for a while, away from the church, but I refused. Running away would just prove to my dad that he still had power over me. I needed to stand my ground. At least let me call the police, Pastor Mike insisted. I agreed, but it went exactly as I expected. The officers took the photo but said there wasn't much they could do. No signs of forced entry. No fingerprints except mine on the envelope. One of them even suggested I might have taken the photo myself for attention. They left without filing a report. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the old church building sounded like footsteps. Every shadow looked like a figure standing in the corner. Around 3 a.m., I had an idea. I dug through my backpack until I found the small voice recorder Pastor Mike had given me for taking notes during tutoring. I turned it on and hid it inside an old stuffed animal I kept on my shelf. If someone came into my room again, maybe I'd catch them. For 3 nights, nothing happened. I reviewed the recordings each morning, just the normal sounds of the building settling and occasionally Pastor Mike checking on me. But on the 4th night, I captured something that made my blood run cold. The recording picked up the sound of my window sliding open around 2:30 a.m., and footsteps, then breathing. And finally, a whisper right next to where I'd been sleeping. Still think you're better than me? I played it for Pastor Mike, who immediately called the police again. This time, they took it more seriously, but still said there wasn't much they could do without catching someone in the act. They suggested I find somewhere else to stay, which wasn't helpful at all. I decided to set a trap. I bought a cheap journal and started writing in it every night before bed, making sure to leave it visible on my nightstand. I filled it with fake emotional entries about how traumatized I was and how I was planning to go public with my story on national news. I even included details about a fictional lawyer who was supposedly helping me build a case against my dad. 3 nights later, the journal disappeared. I pretended to be upset about it, searching everywhere and asking Pastor Mike if he'd seen it. But secretly, I was waiting. I knew what would happen next. Sure enough, 2 days later, pages from my journal started appearing online. Someone created an account called Truth Teller and began posting excerpts with captions like, "This kid is a complete liar," and "He made everything up for attention." The posts claimed I was mentally ill and had fabricated the whole story about my dad. But I prepared for this. In the journal, I'd included a phrase I had never used before in my life: glass onion pride. It was completely random, something I made up on the spot. And sure enough, the anonymous account used that exact phrase in one of their comments. This kid doesn't know the first thing about glass onion pride or real suffering. I started tracking the account's activity. It always posted between 7 p.m. and 9 p.m., exactly when my dad would get home from work. I noticed it used the same unusual punctuation my dad always used in texts, double exclamation points, and no spaces after commas. When I checked the account's password recovery page, it showed a partially hidden email that matched my dad's old Yahoo address. I had proof it was him, but nobody online seemed to care about evidence. People had already decided I was either telling the truth or lying, and no amount of proof would change their minds. So I decided to focus on gathering real-world evidence instead. I started recording voice memos of everything that happened to me. I saved every threatening email and took screenshots of all the anonymous posts. I kept a photo of me sleeping and the audio recording of the intruder. I was building a case, piece by piece. Around this time, I met Eliza at the church youth group. She was a volunteer who helped with the Wednesday night dinners. She overheard me talking to Pastor Mike about the online harassment and offered to help. Her older brother Aaron was studying digital forensics at the community college, and she thought he might have some ideas. I was hesitant at first. I didn't want to drag more people into my mess, but Eliza was persistent. "You can't handle this alone," she said. "And Aaron's super smart with computer stuff." I finally agreed to meet him. Aaron was this tall, quiet guy with thick glasses who barely made eye contact, but he knew his stuff. He showed me how to track IP addresses and set up alerts for any mentions of my name online. He even helped me trace some of the anonymous accounts back to a public library 3 blocks from my dad's house. "He's not very good at covering his tracks," Aaron said, showing me the location data. "He's using public computers, but he's logging into his email from them, which is basically like signing his name." With Aaron's help, I compiled everything: screenshots, location data, timestamps, the audio recording, the photo, and printed it all out. But I didn't take it to the police. Instead, I mailed it to the HR department at the factory where my dad worked. He wasn't some big executive with a fancy job to lose. He worked on the assembly line, but the company had a strict policy against harassment and threatening behavior. 3 days later, my dad was fired. I found out through Eliza, whose uncle also worked at the factory. Apparently, my dad had a complete meltdown when they called him into the office. He flipped a desk and had to be escorted out by security. That evening, he showed up at the church. I was in the basement helping with a food drive when I heard the commotion upstairs. By the time I got there, Pastor Mike and 2 other church members were blocking the entrance while my dad screamed from the parking lot. "You ruined my life," he was shouting. "You think you've won? This isn't over." Someone had already called the police. They arrived and made my dad leave, but they didn't arrest him. He hadn't actually done anything illegal, just yelled a lot. But the church filed for a restraining order that would prevent him from coming within 500 feet of the property. I thought that would be the end of it. My dad had been exposed, fired, and legally barred from approaching me. I finally felt safe enough to focus completely on my education. I started sleeping through the night again. Then I walked into my room one evening and stopped dead in my tracks. Everything was trashed. My bed was flipped over. My clothes were scattered everywhere. My new textbooks were ripped apart. There was no sign of forced entry, no broken windows or damaged locks, just a single piece of paper in the middle of the floor with a typed message: "You took everything from me. I'll do the same to you." I ran to find Pastor Mike, who immediately called the police. They came, took some notes, and basically shrugged. Without evidence of how someone got in, there wasn't much they could do. One officer suggested it might be an inside job, someone from the church who had access to the keys. That possibility hadn't occurred to me, and it made everything worse. I couldn't trust anyone now. Every person I passed in the church hallways became a potential threat. Was it the janitor? One of the volunteers? Someone on the church board who didn't want me there anymore? Eliza found me sitting alone in the church kitchen that night, staring at nothing. When I told her what happened, she immediately called Aaron. He came over the next day with a small bag of equipment. "We're going to catch this a-hole," he said, which was shocking coming from his usually quiet self. He helped me set up a basic motion sensor camera system in my room. It wasn't fancy, just an old smartphone mounted in the corner running a security app connected to Aaron's laptop for alerts. Weeks passed with no incidents. The camera caught nothing but me sleeping and occasionally Pastor Mike checking in. I started to wonder if maybe my dad had given up. I even started making plans for the future. Pastor Mike had helped me enroll in a GED program, and I was making good progress. Marilyn said I might be ready to take the test by the end of the year. Then it happened. At 3:27 a.m. on a Tuesday, the motion sensor triggered. Aaron's system sent an alert to both our phones. I woke up to the notification, terrified to look at the footage, but knowing I had to. What I saw made my stomach drop. The video showed my dad sneaking through the back entrance of the church. He'd somehow obtained a master key from one of the church's maintenance staff. We later discovered he'd befriended the night janitor by pretending to be a relative concerned about me. He walked directly to my room, used the key to open my door, and just stood there. For 6 full minutes, he did nothing but watch me sleep. Then he left as quietly as he'd come. I showed the footage to Pastor Mike first thing in the morning. He was horrified. "This is how he's been getting in all along," he said, "through someone who had legitimate access to the keys." The church board called an emergency meeting. They decided I needed to be moved immediately to a more secure location. They had a small apartment above the church office building that was normally used for visiting speakers. It had its own entrance and a modern security system. They moved me there that same day and hired a locksmith to change every lock in both buildings. They also let the maintenance staff member go after confirming he'd been the one helping my dad. Pastor Mike pulled me aside after everything was settled. "You are not alone anymore," he said firmly. "We won't let him hurt you again." For the first time since I'd left home, I broke down completely. I sobbed into Pastor Mike's shoulder like a little kid. All the fear, all the stress, all the trauma just poured out of me. He just held me and let me cry until I couldn't anymore. Meanwhile, my dad was unraveling online. His posts became more erratic and threatening. He created dozens of new accounts to harass me and spread lies about me. But this time, I was ready. Eliza, Aaron, and I documented everything. We built a digital timeline showing every account, every post, every threat, all traced back to him. Instead of just dumping everything online like I had before, we were strategic. We compiled it all into a clear, factual presentation. No emotional appeals, just evidence. Dates, logs, audio, video footage. We shared it with specific online communities focused on educational abuse and survivor support. This time, the response was different. People who actually understood abuse and trauma recognized the patterns. They connected me with resources I never knew existed. A nonprofit literacy center reached out and offered me specialized tutoring. A lawyer contacted me about filing for a permanent restraining order. For the first time, I felt like I had a real support system. I started volunteering at the literacy center, helping other kids who had fallen behind in school for various reasons. Explaining basic concepts to others actually helped me understand them better myself. I found I had a knack for connecting with the younger kids who were struggling the most. My dad tried one last desperate move. The church was hosting a community picnic, and somehow he found out about it. He showed up pretending to be a concerned father, just trying to reconnect with his troubled son. He approached several church members with this sad story about how I had mental health issues and had run away from home. I was helping set up the sound system when I spotted him across the lawn, talking to an elderly couple from the congregation. Something in me just snapped. Not in an angry way, but in a "I'm done being afraid" way. I walked straight to the microphone we had just set up for announcements. "Excuse me, everyone," I said, my voice shaking at first but growing stronger with each word. "That man over there is my father. He's not supposed to be here. He's the reason I can't read above a 6th grade level at age 18. He's the man who hit me for trying to learn. He's the one who's been breaking into the church to threaten me because I finally escaped." The entire picnic went silent. All eyes turned to my dad, who froze like a deer in headlights. "You don't own me anymore," I continued. "Please leave." For a moment, nobody moved. Then Pastor Mike walked over and stood beside me. Then Eliza, then Aaron, then Marilyn. One by one, people moved to stand with me until my dad was facing a wall of people who knew the truth. He didn't say anything. He just turned and walked away. No explosion of rage, no threats. He just left. The next few months were the most peaceful I'd experienced in years. I threw myself into studying for my GED. I moved into a shared house with 3 other guys from the church youth group. I applied for a special scholarship program for survivors of educational neglect, and I kept volunteering at the literacy center. I thought it was finally over. Then the church discovered something disturbing. My dad had been slipping into early morning prayer services wearing a hat and glasses. The attendance coordinator recognized him from a photo Pastor Mike had circulated and alerted security. He was escorted out and formally trespassed from all church properties. When Pastor Mike told me, I was surprised by my own reaction. I wasn't scared anymore. I was just sad. Sad that my dad was so broken inside that he couldn't stop this obsession. Sad that he'd wasted his life trying to hold me back instead of helping me grow. The following Sunday was my GED graduation ceremony. The literacy center had organized a special event for all the adults who had earned their certificates that year. I hadn't planned to attend. Large crowds still made me nervous, but Pastor Mike convinced me it was important to mark the occasion. What I didn't know was that the church had arranged for me to give the opening prayer. When Pastor Mike called me up to the podium, I froze for a second. Public speaking had never been my thing, but as I looked out at all the faces of people who had helped me, Pastor Mike, Eliza, Aaron, Marilyn, and dozens of others, I found my voice. I walked up to that podium shaking like a leaf. I'd never spoken in front of this many people before. The church was packed with faces I recognized and plenty I didn't. My palms were sweaty as I gripped the sides of the wooden stand. I took a deep breath and just started talking. So, I'm not really good at this whole public speaking thing, I started, my voice cracking a bit. A year ago, I couldn't even read a full paragraph without struggling. Now I'm standing here with my GED, and honestly, I still can't believe it. People were smiling at me, not laughing at me, but actually encouraging me with their eyes. It felt weird, but good. I want to thank Pastor Mike for taking in a random kid who showed up at his church door, and Eliza and Aaron for helping me when they didn't have to, and Marilyn for teaching me stuff I should have learned years ago without ever making me feel stupid. I spotted Eliza in the 3rd row giving me a thumbs up. Pastor Mike was beaming from the front pew. For a second, I thought I saw someone slip in the back door wearing a baseball cap pulled low, but I kept going. Anyway, I'm supposed to do a prayer, so here goes. God, thanks for giving me a second chance at life. Thanks for the people who helped me when my own father wouldn't, and thanks for showing me that I'm not as dumb as he always said I was. Amen. It wasn't the fanciest prayer ever, but it was honest. People clapped as I walked back to my seat. Pastor Mike squeezed my shoulder as I passed him. The ceremony was pretty standard. Speeches, certificate handouts, the usual stuff. When they called my name to get my GED certificate, I heard cheers from the church folks who'd come to support me. I felt my face turning red, but I was smiling so hard my cheeks hurt. After everything wrapped up, we had a small reception in the church basement. I was grabbing some punch when Aaron rushed up to me looking worried. "Your dad's here," he whispered. Security spotted him trying to blend in with the crowd. "They're dealing with it now." My stomach dropped. I've been feeling so good, and now this. I followed Aaron to the hallway where 2 of the church security volunteers were talking to Pastor Mike. They confirmed my dad had been there but left when they approached him. "He didn't cause any trouble," one of them said. just watching from the back, but we made it clear he needs to stay away. I nodded, trying to process this. Do you think he'll ever stop? I asked Pastor Mike. I don't know, he answered honestly, but we're not going to let him ruin today. This is your day. We went back to the reception, but I kept glancing at the doors, expecting my dad to burst in at any moment. He didn't, but the damage was done. My perfect day had this shadow hanging over it now. The next morning, I woke up to a text from an unknown number. Congrats on the GED. Didn't think you had it in you. I showed it to my housemate Dennis, who immediately said I should block the number and tell Pastor Mike. I did both, but the text bothered me all day. It wasn't threatening like his usual messages. It almost sounded proud, but in a weird, backhanded way. A week later, I started my first semester at community college. Just 2 classes to start. English 101 and Introduction to Psychology. I figured psychology might help me understand why my dad was the way he was. The college had this special program for non-traditional students, which basically meant people like me who had weird educational backgrounds. My first day was terrifying. I got lost twice trying to find my classroom and nearly had a panic attack in the bathroom, but I made it through. My English professor, Dr. Martinez, seemed cool. She didn't call on me when I didn't raise my hand, which I appreciated. After class, I was walking to the bus stop when I spotted a familiar car in the parking lot. My dad's old blue Civic was parked near the entrance. I froze mid-step, scanning the area for him. I didn't see him anywhere, but I knew he was watching. I could feel it. Instead of waiting for the bus, I called Eliza and asked if she could pick me up. She arrived 15 minutes later, and I practically dove into her car. He's here, I told her, ducking down in the seat. At the college. Eliza's face hardened as she pulled out of the parking lot. We need to do something about this. He can't keep following you forever. She was right. This had gone on long enough. When we got back to the church, we found Pastor Mike and explained what happened. He suggested we talk to the college security office and show them the restraining order. They could keep an eye out for my dad and prevent him from coming on campus. The next day, Aaron went with me to meet the head of campus security, a retired cop named Officer Bailey. I showed him a picture of my dad and explained the situation. He was super understanding and immediately added my dad to their watch list. We take stalking very seriously here, Officer Bailey told me. If he shows up, we'll escort him off campus and call the police. I felt better knowing the college was on my side, but I was still nervous every time I went to class. I started varying my routes, never taking the same path twice. I checked under my car before getting in. I kept my phone ready to record at all times. It was exhausting living like this. 3 weeks into the semester, I was sitting in the college library working on an English paper when someone sat down across from me. I looked up, expecting to see a classmate, and nearly fell out of my chair. It was my dad. He looked different, thinner, with dark circles under his eyes. He was wearing a dress shirt that hung loose on his frame. Before I could run or call for help, he held up his hands. Just give me 5 minutes, he said quietly. Then I'll leave and never bother you again. I should have gotten up. I should have called security, but something in his voice made me hesitate. He sounded defeated, not angry, not threatening, just tired. 4 minutes, I said, my finger hovering over the emergency button on my phone. And I'm recording this. He nodded and took a deep breath. I lost my house, he said. After getting fired, I couldn't make the payments. I've been living in my car for the past month. I didn't respond. I wasn't going to feel sorry for him. I saw you at graduation and at your college. I know I shouldn't have been there. He paused, struggling with whatever he wanted to say next. You're doing good, better than I ever did. I still said nothing, just watched the timer on my phone counting down. I'm moving to Arizona next week. My brother got me a job at his construction company. I won't contact you anymore. He trailed off, then reached into his pocket. I tensed up, but he just pulled out a small envelope and slid it across the table. This is yours. I should have given it to you years ago. With that, he stood up and walked away, just like that. No explosion, no threats, no drama. I sat there stunned as he disappeared through the library doors. I waited 5 minutes before touching the envelope, half expecting it to be something horrible. When I finally opened it, I found a faded photograph of my mom holding me as a baby, with a letter folded behind it. The letter was from my mom, dated a week before she died. It was addressed to me, to be opened on my 18th birthday. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely read it. It was simple, just a mother's love letter to her child, hopes for my future, advice about life, and at the end, a line that broke me. I know your father will raise you with all the love and wisdom I've seen in him. She had no idea what he would become after she died. No idea that her death would twist him into someone unrecognizable. I sat in that library and cried until a student worker came to check on me. I showed her the letter and photo, and she sat with me until I pulled myself together. Her name was Teresa, and she ended up becoming one of my closest friends at college. That night, I told Pastor Mike about the encounter. He was concerned my dad had approached me, but relieved to hear he was leaving the state. Do you believe him? Pastor Mike asked. I don't know, I answered honestly, but I hope so. The next few months were the most normal of my life. I went to classes, I made friends, I studied hard and got decent grades. I kept volunteering at the literacy center, working with kids who reminded me of myself. I even started dating Teresa, though we took things super slow since relationships were completely new territory for me. I kept expecting my dad to pop up again, but he never did. Eliza's uncle, who worked at the factory, confirmed he'd quit his apartment lease and left town. Officer Bailey never spotted him on campus again. Slowly, I started to relax. By the end of my first semester, I had a 3.8 GPA, not bad for a kid who couldn't read properly a year earlier. Dr. Martinez asked if I'd consider being a peer tutor for the English department. Apparently, my background made me especially good at explaining concepts to struggling students. The church threw a small celebration for my first semester success. Pastor Mike gave a speech about resilience that made me blush. Eliza and Aaron brought a cake with College Boy Genius written on it as a joke. Even Marilyn showed up with a gift, a fancy pen set for all those papers you'll be writing. During